So I'm going to preface this whole thing by saying I'm not going to probably make anyone happy. And for one, there are so many different directions you can go with this. There's so many different things you can talk about, so many different things to address. And I went with one direction, well actually about 3 directions, all at the same time. It's going to be a good time. And I'm going to try to give you just a framework, basically, to think through how do we think about medical marijuana or marijuana CBD in the Christian. And I am not going to be able to answer all your questions. I am hoping to at least give you some tools to use as you interact and engage with it and interact and engage with others. So this is equipping, preparing to be able to help other people. And so as we look at this, we're going to start with the Bible. What does the Bible say about how we as Christians should live? What is supposed to be our general demeanor? How are we supposed to be? What are we supposed to be known for? And then I'm going to give, and I'm probably going to pare it down more than yesterday, a very, very brief history of marijuana. And then I'm going to actually give you pharmacology, a brief pharmacology lesson, which probably our nurse here, our resident nurse, probably could give you a better pharmacology lesson. But I'm going to give you a crash course and then just some things to think about. And I'm going to try to give you at least 10 minutes to ask questions, because we went about 15 minutes over my class time last time because of questions. So I'll try to make sure we have at least 10 minutes of questions. So before we get started, let's start with prayer. Our gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for your faithfulness in our lives. We thank you for your goodness and grace. And we thank you for the opportunity to meet together, to be encouraged and edified, to sing, and to look at your word and the instructions that it gives. We thank you for your goodness and your grace. We thank you for your love. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If you turn with me in your Bibles to 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 11. 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 1 through 11. And while we're turning there, I'm going to read to you from 2 Timothy 3, 16 and 17, very well-known verses. All scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be adequate, equipped for every good work. And that includes the topic we are talking about today. How do we engage and understand marijuana, CBD, and the Christian? And first and foremost, we're going to start and look, well, what does the Bible say about how we as Christians are to live? And we get to 1 Thessalonians. Paul is checking on the Thessalonian believers. He's writing to them. They've been experiencing persecution. They've been having a hard time of it. And he is checking in on them. And he is going to be encouraging them. And starting in verse 1 of chapter 5, now as to the times and the epochs, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you, for you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like the thief in the night. While they're saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day would overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of the night nor of darkness. So let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. For those who sleep do their sleeping at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet, the hope of salvation. So there's a lot of information here. We're not going to touch the eschatology or the end times teaching, but there is a comparison and contrast between those who have placed their faith in Jesus, those who are believers, how they are to live compared to the world and how they live. In the world, those who are unbelievers, those who have not placed their faith in Jesus, there's two categories. Those who are asleep and those who are drunk. Those who are asleep are those who want to go through life peaceably. Don't disturb me, I won't disturb you, leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. The frittering away of their life until it's gone, they are basically indifferent to what's going on around them. They're asleep. The second are those who are drunk. They have no self-control. They do whatever they feel like, and they do not care about the consequences of what they do. If they can get away with it, they're going to try to. And so basically there's these two basic subcategories of those who are not believers. When it comes to believers, though, we are told the opposite of drunkenness is to be sober. And it has the idea of being alert, free from every form of mental and spiritual excess and confusion, to be clear-headed and to be self-possessed. So to be in our right minds. In 2 Timothy 4, Paul's writing to Timothy, and I think it's on your sheet of paper if you want to look there, but in 1 Timothy 4, Paul's getting ready to be killed. He knows he's going to be martyred. He's giving final instructions to Timothy, teaching him to be ready always, teaching others. And in verse 5 we're told, "But you be sober in all things, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry." Paul was going to be martyred soon. And he is trying to instruct and encourage Timothy to be living in a certain way. Be sober. It's our same word we saw in 1 Thessalonians. Be sober, alert, clear-headed. In 1 Peter 1, 13 through 14, Peter writes this, "Therefore prepare your minds for action." And the literal translation would be, gird up the loins of your mind. And it's Middle East. They wore robes. Trying to run in a robe, I would not do well. And so they would pull it up in, tuck it in so they wouldn't get tripped up. Well, the same thing. Gird up the loins of your mind so that you're prepared and ready for action. Be ready for combat. Be ready. Keep sober in spirit. Fix your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. There's that looking forward to the coming of Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the former lusts which were yours in your ignorance. All right? So Peter is writing, be ready, be prepared. Don't be distracted. Be alert. Be clear-headed. And then we have later on in 1 Peter 4:7, the end of all things is near. Therefore be of sound judgment and sober spirit for the purpose of prayer. So the idea of a sound is healthy. It's robust. It's not emaciated. It is not decrepit and falling apart, but sound judgment. In other words, it's healthy judgment, and the word for judgment is to be of a sound mind, or to be sane, to be in one's right mind, the ability to think straight. It is the opposite of this word that means to be insane. It's to have a measured and ordered way of life, and to be self-controlled, moderate, and actually kind of overlaps with the idea of being sober. And then 1 Peter 5:8, be of a sober spirit, be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Be alert, keep awake, be on watch, be on guard, to be vigilant. And so there's this idea that Christians are to be characterized by an alertness, an awareness, understanding what's going on around them, being ready to give an answer, being ready and able to interact with those around us about the gospel, to be able to give answers, to be able to understand and aware of what's going on around them. And then in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, we're told this by Paul, all things are lawful for me. That does not mean that I have freedom to go sleep with whoever I want. That doesn't mean I have the freedom to get absolutely inebriated. Because actually in Ephesians 4, we're told, do not be drunk with wine, but be controlled by the Spirit, or be full of Spirit. I'm not even going to get into the grammar today. But there's this idea that we are supposed to be characterized by a certain mentality, and drunkenness is not it. So whether it's with alcohol, marijuana, something else, we are not supposed to be controlled by some other substance. And in chapter 6 of 1 Corinthians in verses 12 and 13, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. In other words, not to be under control of anything. Now, we're talking about marijuana, but let me ask you this. How many of us in the morning when we get up, how hard is it for us to ask in a Christian way until we have our first cup of coffee? Ouch. Well, at that point, am I being mastered by something? What about, well, I can't interact well until I get a chance to have some me time. Watch TV, spend time on my computer, whatever it may be. If I'm under the control of that, well, I've got a problem. What about food? I can't say no. This matter applies far beyond what we're talking about specifically today, but not to be mastered by anything. Food is for the stomach and the stomach for food, but God will do away with both of them. Yet the body is not for immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. Galatians 5:13, for you were called to freedom, brethren, only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. So yes, we have been given freedom in Christ, but our freedom is so that we are now free to serve one another. I do not have to be controlled by my own desires. I do not have to be controlled by something. I do not need to be mastered by anything other than Christ. And we're not even going to look at Romans 6, but Romans 6, the big premise is you were bought. You were once slaves to sin. You've been bought by Christ. And now you are no longer slaves to sin. You are slaves to Christ. You have a new master. We learned about this yesterday in the general session. You have a new master. And you can't serve two different masters. And if you have something that controls you other than God, we've got a problem. So as we have our biblical framework, we're going to try to start putting pieces underneath that in regards to marijuana and CBD. So before we do that, though, I am going to give just a really, really brief history of marijuana. And I'm going to pare it down quite a bit. And I can get you copies of my notes if you want to look at them a little bit more. If you look at, I'm going to give you the other handout, and you'll find the information. Now, part of the problem is that trying to find good history about marijuana is super duper hazy, and there is a pun intended in that. Because a lot of the people who are trying to promote the use of marijuana will cite all sorts of things. And you're not sure whether this information is actually reliable or not in many different cases. Now, there is very good indicators that it was used in the BC era. Hemp, cannabis, has been used by man for thousands of years, primarily as a source for clothing, textiles. It has a very fibrous structure, and it works well for making textiles and clothing. There was some medicinal uses for it, and actually there's a particular Chinese doctor who actually used that with an assortment of other plants and stuff like that to actually do anesthesia for surgeries. It's kind of interesting. Now, if you fast forward to the 1700s, you're going to hear people say, well, the founding fathers smoked it. That is not true. There's some quote out running around on the interwebs about Thomas Jefferson saying, there's nothing I love more than sitting on my porch, smoking a joint, basically, looking over my fields of hemp. That is completely fabricated. And I have reason to believe that's fabricated because several places said, no, that's fabricated, including a site that is actually trying to sell marijuana. So it's like, well, if they're willing to admit it's just made up, it most likely is made up. And not to mention, honestly, on another side note, I really have a hard time believing that Thomas Jefferson could have written the Declaration of Independence under the influence of pot. I really, just saying.
I mean, there's not a single dude in there.
Yeah, exactly. So, just saying. So, and being one of the major writers of the Constitution. So, I don't know. So, there's a whole other aspect. Another problem that kind of happens is those who are giving the history of cannabis are primarily people who are trying to push the legalization of it and the use of it. And quite often what happens is you go down to the bottom and you look at the source material and they're citing someone else who is doing the same writing, and they're citing someone else who's then citing the other person. So it's like no one's actually citing like good data, they're citing each other. It's kind of like news sources today.
Russian disinformation.
Yeah, it's exactly, like it's really hard to actually sift through information to actually get good information as far as what is or is not actually going on. So, and without really trying to get political, it's almost easier to find out clear information on COVID-19 than it is to find clear information about medical marijuana and its uses. Like, just, that's the way it is. Fast forward, marijuana was not regulated until 1937. Back in 1930, Harry Anslinger was the first head of what would later come to be the FDA. Prohibition was on its last legs. And he was looking around going, I've got to figure out how to keep my job, and I need to find ways. Narcotics are not going to be enough. We already have, they were outlawed in the teens of the 1900s, and prohibition was going away. It was on its last legs. It was going to be closed in 1932. He said, we got to figure out some way to figure out how to keep my job. And so he started interacting with and playing with the emotions of the people, and this would be one of those cases, using poor information to maybe have a good goal of making marijuana illegal, but telling a bunch of lies or things blown out of proportion is probably not the best way to do it. Because that's what he did. He accused, there's on record quotes, accused people of smoking pot leads to jazz music and interracial marriage. So like those kind of things. So, so one of those things where now what's happening is those who are promoting marijuana and its use are going, look, he was just a jerk, self-seeking, promoting guy who had no knowledge or information, and he outlawed it, and we should make it legal again. So, warning there. So that's kind of why they've been able to get some traction, is because of some of the poor decision making that was made in making it illegal in the first place. I'll open it up for questions in a little bit. But believe me, if I sound confused or if you feel confused, it's because there's just so many different moving parts, and trying to get it concise is not easy. And what's also interesting, and I don't have this in any of your notes, but as I was doing some final reading, what's also interesting is the cotton industry helped try to push for the making of hemp, which was used primarily for textiles, illegal as well. So they would get rid of some competition. So there's all sorts of just different moving pieces and all sorts of fog around cannabis use and that sort of thing. Now that we've gotten a little bit, on a completely another note, Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and a few other pagan religions all have an organic tie to medical marijuana use through their founding and through the practice of the religion. And something else that we see as we look in the Bible, you look in Galatians, you look in Revelation, you look in the Old Testament, is there's this tie to being out of one's mind in some sort of euphoric ecstasy in pagan worship. Actually, in Galatians 5, and I believe it's verse 20, it's talking about sorcery, stuff like that. The word for sorcery is translated from the Greek word pharmakeia, which is where we get the word pharmacy, which is kind of interesting in regards to that. So there's this understanding that false pagan worship, idolatry, and the use of substances to get you to this high for supposed communion with a higher power has been going on for millennia. And so just things to think about. All right, so now that we've got a little bit of a brief history lesson, we're going to get a little bit of a pharmacology lesson. So I'm going to give you some fun words to think about. So pharmacology, first and foremost, is the branch of medicine concerned with the uses, effects, and modes of action of drugs. I worked as a paramedic for 7.5 years. I worked in EMS for a total of 10.5 years. And one of the things that we were drilled into our minds was the 5 rights of drug administration. Right patient, right drug, right route, right time, and right dose. The 5 rights of drug administration are absolutely critical no matter whether you're giving oxygen, aspirin, fentanyl, whatever it may be, the 5 rights of medication administration. So, for instance, say this practice happens in my home with my kids, especially when my kids were younger. So I had a 3-year-old and 1-year-old. I got to make sure that I'm giving the drug to the right kid. Now I need to make sure I get the right drug. So as a child, as an infant, a little kid, they can get Tylenol, but they can't get ibuprofen until they're a little bit older. So for my son, I don't want to give ibuprofen, so I got to make sure I check the bottle and I have the right drug. Next thing is that because I had 2 kids of different ages, different sizes, different weights, the dosage was going to be different between the 2 kids. Now that they're older, they're at a certain level, they basically get the same dosage. For ibuprofen, Tylenol is still a little bit different. Now, the next thing, the right route. I'm going to give my kids Tylenol. Well, I don't give it to them through their eye or their nose. And there are drugs that go in the eye, and there are drugs that go up the nose. And there's a few other routes, intravenous, rectally, there's intramuscularly, subdurally, under the skin. There's many different ways that you can give many different kinds of medications. Some medications, depending on what it is, there's multiple routes in which you give it, which will affect how quickly the drug takes effect and how long it will last, and the amount that you give. So, for instance, there are certain medications for seizures that, depending on the route, you might give more of the same medication, but it will take longer for it to absorb, and the effects will actually take longer too. So just different things to keep in mind. The next terminology I'm going to introduce to you is desired dose. A desired dose, shorthand is DD, but a desired dose is the dosing of a particular drug for a particular patient for a particular effect. And this can be weight-based, it can be the medication and what you're trying to accomplish. Because there are some drugs that, depending on how much you give, it gives different effects for that drug. So, and right now I could completely be wrong, but amiodarone. You give a small amount and it affects your kidneys. You give a larger amount and it starts affecting your heart and how your heart operates. So depending on what you do, with this medication, it will have different effects. Next word, this is a fun one, pharmacokinetics. How the medication moves through your system. So depending on how you administrate it, it will move through your system different ways at different speeds. And then pharmacodynamics is how that medication actually interacts with your body and how it gets metabolized, in other words, broken down and expelled. So just some fun things. And then we have another word called cumulative effect. Okay, if you take allergy medicine, you're actually familiar with cumulative effect. So for instance, you take Claritin or, and right now I'm Zyrtec. If you take it once, does it do anything? You have to take it over a period of a week or two for it to actually build up in your system and start doing what it's supposed to do. There's an accumulation of that medication within your system to do what it's supposed to do. And then actually, if you, who's done this, you stop, you miss it one day and it still kind of has an effect, but it does start wearing off over time, right? All right, so cumulative effect. And then we have what is the half-life of a drug. So how long it takes a particular drug in your system to get broken down, metabolized, and no longer cause the effect. Now, as we think about these sort of things, I want to make sure I give you enough time for questions. As you think about these sort of things, I'm going to start talking about what we have discovered in the early 1990s, what is called, or actually it was probably before that, the endocannabinoid system. There is actually a system within our body that actually produces its own cannabinoids. Now, cannabinoids are what are found within the cannabis plant. There are over 400 different chemical compounds within a cannabis plant. We don't even know what most of them do yet. And there are over 100 different cannabinoids within the cannabis plant as well. The two main ones are THC and CBD. You've probably heard those terms already, THC and CBD. THC is the one that gives you a high. CBD is the non-high inducing medication. However, as I've been doing research, basically you have receptors, right? They receive the information. So here's a receptor, and THC lands in the receptor and gives its effect. CBD, in conjunction with THC, actually can either open that up or close that receptor up, depending on how much CBD in relation to THC. And there's this whole thing, and I honestly haven't figured it all out, but depending on the concentration of CBD to THC, it will either enhance or diminish the effects of the THC. So they do interact and work together. Now, when it comes to these two medications, or these two drugs, there's a lot of different things at play. When it comes to THC, as I was doing research, the noticeable effects from THC, so noticeable as in they've got the high, can last for several hours, depending on the route in which it's administered. So if it's inhaled through vaping or smoking, it's basically instant. And it will last for like 2 or 3 hours. If you ingest it orally, the effects can take up to an hour, hour and a half, and then will last much longer than inhaling or vaping. Now think about this for a moment. Imagine if someone didn't know, they eat some, it's like, oh, it didn't do anything, and they ate more. What just happened? They just overdosed. Because in a little while, it's gonna build because we just got a cumulative effect. And we got over our desired dose. THC, however, will remain in your system for up to 7 days, just around your bloodstream for 36 hours, and depending on how much you've had, you can actually find it in your hair for up to 90 days afterwards. If they do a drug test on your hair and you've been a regular user of marijuana, you would fail a drug test. What's also interesting is THC is actually found in secondhand smoke. So we all smell tobacco smoke, and it's It makes us cough and gag. If you smell marijuana smoke, you could actually get high off secondhand smoke from marijuana. And actually, kids who live in a home where parents are smoking it regularly would actually fail a drug test because of the THC in the secondhand smoke. So things to think about. The other thing is say someone is taking small amounts of THC, but if it's staying in your system and you're taking it regularly, what do we just do? We are doing a cumulative effect. And you could end up high by accident. So just some things to think about. Now here's some other considerations to think about. CBD is called a dietary supplement. It's considered a dietary supplement. You go to the homeopathic section at Walmart and those pills and stuff like that. Did you know that none of that is regulated? So they don't have to put all the ingredients on the bottle if they don't want to. They don't have to, they could put ingredients on the bottle that aren't actually there, and it would not have any legal repercussions at this point. So something to think about, in the manufacturing of CBD, there are multiple ways to manufacture CBD, and they all have different results. And depending on batch to batch, there may actually be differences within different batches of the same, supposedly the same product. And depending on the way in which CBD is made, there can be different amounts of THC mixed in. And you don't know unless they tell you, and you're trusting them to actually tell you what's actually in it. And half the time they don't even know unless they get it third-party tested.
Which they don't need.
Which they don't need to get it third-party tested. So say you have someone with CBD oil and it's supposed to have below 0.3% THC to be considered legal, or well, not even legal, but normal CBD. They don't know, and actually they've done some testing, and sometimes the THC content is much higher than they say it is. What did we just do? If someone's taking CBD, innocently thinking that they're taking CBD, and you have a cumulative effect of 4 days from now, all of a sudden they're having a hard time thinking and remembering and understanding instructions and stuff like that, and it's because they had a cumulative effect. Now, this is not to say that like CBD is the awful evil whatever and narcotics are good, because actually I had a call. My partner and I got there. We looked at the patient completely gorked out. In other words, they're slobbering, unconscious, decreased respirations. We look at the lady's pupils and they're pinpoint. Oh, narcotic overdose. Have they been taking any narcotics? No, they don't take any narcotics. They don't ingest any narcotics. Oh, okay. And then, come to find out, my partner, who rode with another paramedic in the other truck, said, guess what we found? We pulled her shirt back, and she had 5 fentanyl patches on. And what happened is that how a fentanyl patch works is it's designed to be a slow release over several days, and it works very well, and it's just enough to take the edge off. But even at the end of its lifespan of saying, okay, take it off, put a new one on, there's still trace amounts of fentanyl in it. And if you don't take it off, it keeps giving fentanyl to the patient. So guess what? She got an accidental overdose because of cumulative effect, because of multiple patches from fentanyl. Now if that happens with a prescribed drug that the doctors are giving specific instructions to, that they're saying, this is how much, we know how much goes in, this kind of thing. Imagine all the sorts of problems that could be compounded by something that we're not even sure what's in it. And that's, as a former medical provider, we have the scriptural basis for we're not to be drunk, we're to be in our right minds. or to be thinking clearly. But then on this other side, as a medical provider, looking at it going, this is not wisdom to recommend or encourage the use of something that really we don't know. And quite often what happens is the doctor's like, well, I'll write you a prescription for marijuana or medical marijuana or CBD or something like that, or try CBD, but they're not going to give direct instructions because the doctors don't even know what may or may not be in this medication. They can't so basically it's left to the patient to figure it out, and hopefully you don't get intoxicated by accident in the process. And then with the medical marijuana for someone with cancer or something like that, well, go to the store, they'll figure out, and like, well, here's gummies, here's brownies, or you can smoke it or vape it, and just do whatever works for you. Well, that's not really helping or empowering or being a good patient advocate at that point. And just in regards to Christianity, and we should be innocent as doves and wise as serpents. We should be aware of what's going on. We should have an understanding of what it is we're actually putting in us. If you gave someone, like in regards to like a narcotic, I can look at a Mosby's drug thing and say, okay, this is how it works, this is how it interacts, this is the basic weight per mic dose, and this is how much we should give, how frequently, all that kind of thing. They've had to do the work because they're legally required to. When it comes to CBD, figure it out. It's the Wild West. Yeah.
Medical marijuana doesn't do this work because it's medical.
Funny.
Yeah. And the thing is there's a lot of people who are trying to have some sort of something. And here's the other interesting thing. They're trying to promote medical marijuana for a drug. How many of you realize that medical marijuana, or marijuana in general, so there's hemp and there's marijuana. Hemp has a concentration of less than 0.3% THC in the plant. Marijuana is greater than 0.3% THC. Hemp is legalized and it's starting to be used in textiles again and is used for CBD. Marijuana is still a federal class Schedule I drug, which means it's technically a federal felony to use it. It's a federal felony. So even though the states have legalized it, it would be like, and not trying to get political, but it'd be like a state saying, you're allowed to buy assault weapons or fully automatic weapons in this state, even though it's against the law federally, but you can do it here. How do you think anyone would get away with that? And the answer is no. But that's what they're doing with marijuana. Even medical marijuana, it's still a federal offense. It's a felony to own marijuana, just like it would be to have ecstasy or LSD. It's in the same class. Now, I think it's very interesting. They're leaving it there. Now, if the government really cared about people actually being able to figure it out, you could drop it down to a Schedule II, and people would actually be able to do some studies and research, broad, big studies on the effects and the benefits and all that kind of stuff. But all the studies so far are like 1,000, 2,000 people in small things. And what's also interesting, when it comes to CBD, they did it. I was doing some looking about testing, and so they did a control group blind test. So some of them actually had CBD, some of them didn't. So for those who actually had CBD, the pain decrease, if they were using CBD, 30% of people said there was an improvement. Those who took the placebo said there was a 27% improvement. So, but then at the same time, there are actually 2 drugs FDA approved that have THC in them that are prescribed to cancer patients. And it's in the information that I'm going to give you. I have the drug names. You can look them up on the internet. They are used for cancer patients because it does help with nausea and with them actually being able to have an appetite to eat. But guess what? They know what the dosing is. They know how much they're giving the patient, how quick. It's an oral, typically an oral, if I'm understanding correctly, and they know the duration of action, like how long it lasts, the cumulative effect, how long in between, all of those things. There's also the only absolute clear for a CBD-based drug that they know it actually does something is for 2 very severe types of epilepsy in children. 2 different syndromes, and it works extremely well, but it is an actual medication. The testing's been done, and they've done the work. In regards to pain management, inflammation, mood balancing, or whatever they want to call it, the jury's completely still out, and more testing needs to be done. But here's the thing, it's a federal Schedule I drug, so any good testing is probably not going to happen until that changes. And right now, there doesn't seem to be any major push to change it at the federal level because it's legal in the states. But here's the interesting thing. I was listening to a podcast a while ago, and the Biden administration was lamenting that they couldn't get some of the young, brilliant minds from California to come work in the White House because they had a history of smoking pot. Because even though it was legalized in California, federal offense, you can't work in the federal government. Also, I went and purchased a firearm recently. Hi, YouTube. And one of the questions is have you used marijuana, CBD, something like that? Because if I had, I probably would not be allowed to purchase a firearm. Now here's where it also gets a little nefarious. If you get CBD made from hemp, it is not illegal. But if you get CBD made from marijuana, you just committed a federal felony. And they don't have to tell you where it came from. It's like playing Russian roulette. You don't know what you're getting into. So, some things to think about. I'm going to stop there because we have 9 minutes left. So I'm going to open it up for questions, and I will hopefully. Yes.
I'm just going to give 2 examples right now. If you heard in the news not too long ago, there was a wedding in Florida, and 8 people got overdosed on cannabis.
Yeah.
And the bride ended up being one of the ones who was putting along with the caterer, putting the marijuana in. So she spent her honeymoon night in jail.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And then if you remember, there was an accident in Oklahoma where a car carrying 6 teens got in an accident and was hit by a dump truck. That individual, 16-year-old girl who had just gotten her license 6 months ago, or a provisional license, she was also, they tested her blood, she had THC in her blood.
Yeah.
And you can't, and anyway, from a law enforcement perspective, okay, and because
Yeah.
they know I'm a former
Yeah.
police officer, you can't test it on the street. It has
No.
to be a blood test.
Yep. You can't have them do a breathalyzer like with alcohol.
And they still have not come up with a way to test the breath, quote unquote, as of yet. So,
Yep.
you know, and then if someone refuses to give the blood,
You wouldn't know.
you won't know.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, the question I had was, I have a friend who is very ill,
Yeah.
and she's on multiple medications, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking way overdosing
Oh yeah.
because of the combinations. And her doctor wanted to take her off oxycodone because it's been too long, too much, and
Yeah.
whatever. And he suggested CBD.
Yeah.
She said, when she was younger, she got somehow involved with it at one point, and she almost died because somebody slipped it into brownies, something like that.
Yeah.
And so she didn't want to try anything like that.
Yeah.
So she's asking me, is it really safe? And I'm like, I don't think so. But, you know, I mean, and even if it was safe and it's called CBD, I wouldn't go to the pharmacy or wherever you have to go to get it for her. So she would have to find somebody else to do that.
Yeah.
But
And-
this is.
Yeah, and that's the struggle, because I actually had a patient that we would go pick up for transfers. He was paralyzed from the neck down. He was on a vent. He couldn't breathe on his own. He had like a face mask to breathe for him, and he used cannabis. He used marijuana. If he used narcotics, that guy would be dead.
Right,
Because
but nobody would tell
narcotics.
me the combination. I said, there's got to be a combination. She was afraid
Yeah.
to go off the other stuff
Yeah,
in case it didn't work.
Right.
And I
Well,
said, no, don't even do it.
and because narcotics can actually, they slow down your gastroparesis, they can, like everything going on in your gut, And if you're paralyzed, that doesn't work very well to begin with. You take a whole bunch of narcotics and you die of sepsis because you're backed up.
She's at a point where she says, you know how hard it is not to die? Because she had surgery and she went out, they brought her back. And she really wished they didn't, but she has a daughter that's disabled. So she says, I have to be here.
Yeah.
But she's killing herself with all of these, and then she smokes on top of it. Regular
Yeah.
cigarettes, but still.
Yeah. And that's the struggle, is like, there is some indication, even with the THC side of things, that there could be some really actual long-term pain management benefits. The problem is the way in which they're going about trying to accomplish it. It has nothing to do with actually helping patients. It's just people want to justify their ability to get high. They are trying to sell this idea to everyone about how great and wonderful it is, but they're not willing to actually go through the proper channels of having it actually be done in such a way to actually help people in a way that is, and I'm not necessarily for government regulation, but working in the medical field and seeing some of the things that have come out of the past, like snake oil, basically. You have no idea what's in this stuff, and they say it's a cure-all. When someone starts saying it fixes everything, I get really suspicious. And so it's just one of those things to try to think through. Could there be some actual real benefits? And I think the answer is yes.
Especially for terminal patients.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the problem is the way in which it's being gone about, it is not helpful. And it's more about people trying to justify their sin than it is to actually try to help people. Any other questions? Yeah.
First, I'd like to say I love what you presented here on the first page especially. It's just so helpful in so many different areas, so I really like that, the way you presented it. But I'm wondering where your sources are. First, I'll say, I never took marijuana, never. I have no interest in using CBD.
Yeah.
But I did take an extensive herbal class, and there
Yeah.
was a lot of information about marijuana, and she found abundant information in books. So I'm just wondering if your resources are the internet and not what's available in
Yeah.
more natural.
Yeah, so most of I looked on both sides. So if you look at and it was mostly on the internet, but you look on the websites that are selling marijuana online or cannabis products online, and they'll tell you it helps with pain, it helps with inflammation, it helps with mood regulation, all that kind of stuff. So they're having all that. Then you look at the ones, so one of my favorite websites, and unfortunately, unless you get the paid version or you work for a hospital, you don't get full access, but one of my favorites is Up to Date. And what it is basically these are real-time, so say you read a medical journal, and you start looking at it, and you go, oh, where are they getting all this information? And it shows you the studies and the information. Up to Date is actually the collation of that actual study material.
Okay, I'm sorry, I should have clarified. I
Yeah.
know the history side of it.
Oh, the history
Because in
side.
her research,
Yeah.
she documents through the centuries going way back, far beyond just people,
Yeah.
Hindus and Buddhists using it
Yeah.
for altered states.
Yeah,
So I'm just mentioning that if you didn't use books, there are a lot of books that do cover the history of it, even the history going back, around 1937 and when it was changed and all of that, so.
yeah. I didn't use any books. I don't actually have any books with herbal type stuff in them in regards to that. Now, I did find, as far as, and I don't even remember his name, there was a Chinese doctor who used it way back in like 1000 BC, something like that. There have been some Greeks who used it, once again, primarily as textiles, also as medicinal type uses, and they were saying, yeah, it'll fix everything from nausea to something else, which pain, all sorts of different things. So there is a history of it being used medicinally. I think some of where we're at now is we're trying to figure out how to have clear minds. We're trying to think clearly, and we're also trying to make sure that we are not making decisions that who knows what's going on with this. And I'm not saying we trust necessarily big pharma, but at the same time, what has been interesting in like the 1980s, the person selling cannabis was the drug dealer. Now today, those selling prescription drugs are the drug dealers. And there's been a shift in mentality and understanding, not unintentionally, to try to give certain connotations as well. And so, like, I did work in the medical field. I worked from a medical perspective. I'm all for trying to do things naturally, as far as if you have pain, go see a chiropractor. That might help. Getting a good massage might help. Rubbing out muscle knots might help instead of just popping an ibuprofen or a Tylenol or getting pain medication. Maybe you just need to stretch more. All of those things. But then when we're playing with something that we don't really know what's going on with it, I get a little bit apprehensive as far as that goes. And then with the up-to-date studies, a lot of it is we just need more information. Right now, there's a lot of people say, yeah, it helps me so much. But almost all of the research as far as that side, it's almost all anecdotal. It's all based on, well, this is what I did and it worked for me. There's no actual study there's very few studies where we go, okay, these people are actually taking it, these people aren't. And what is the correlation between the two? And like that kind of thing as far as trying to look at things directly, but yeah.
And one of the things you presented was that when this man back in 1937 you mentioned wanted to make this shift, I loved you presenting that, was that they also, which is just the wickedness of the enemy, started creating hybrids of marijuana and feeding it into the system. So the marijuana that we had on our illegal market was a hyped up hybrid that had more of that hallucinogenic effect, which the original marijuana did not have. So I would like to see studies not only done on marijuana, but on heirloom seeds, which you can find people through the years that can do it.
Yeah.
So good information, thank you, Nathan.
Yeah, you're welcome. And that's the other thing is too, even today, compared to like the 1960s, it is not I found an article, it's like your pot is not the same pot as your grandparents' pot, or something like that. Because
with all the stuff coming in from Mexico, you know they.
Oh yeah, there's the THC has been increased. You can actually get solutions that are almost 100% THC that are just droppers. So like once again, it's like this idea of like there could be some real benefit, but like why they're trying to force it in legalization in the state or legalization in states, but we're not even taking care of the federal. And at least change it so that at least it can be said, you know, there might be some medical benefit, and we actually are going to do some studies and we're actually going to look at it. No self-respecting scientist in big big lab is going to want to do a broad, expansive test on it because you're still looking at possibly having funding taken away if they wanted to. You could have several of your human rights and liberties taken away as far as an American citizen if they so chose. Right now they're not, but they could change that. So that's like just some of the concern with that. Now hemp is technically legal, and that's with a less than 0.3% of THC. And so maybe someone will actually try to do something on that side of things. But most of the people are wanting their THC and they're wanting the buzz that comes with it. From a lot of the even on the websites of the people who are promoting it. That's basically what they want.